Huh?
It's 5:05 and welcome into a Friday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. We start off with breaking news this morning. U.S. dock workers have agreed to return to work after port operators sweetened their contract offer, ending what was a 3-day strike that threatened to disrupt the American economy. The breakthrough came Thursday afternoon after port employees were offered a 62% increase in wages over 6 years. That's according to multiple people familiar with the ongoing contract negotiations. That agreement ends a strike that had closed container ports from Maine to Texas and 2 here in North Carolina, the much smaller port at Morehead City and the larger port in Wilmington. The new offer, up from an earlier proposed 50% increase, came after the White House privately pressed the large shipping lanes and cargo terminal operators who employ members of the International Longshoremen's Association to make a new offer to the union. The Longshoremen Association and port operators, in a joint statement, said that they had reached a tentative agreement on wages and union members would return to work. However, they said the agreement would extend the prior contract, which is in place starting this week and will run through January the 15th of next year while the two sides negotiate on other issues. We'll continue to track that throughout the morning and provide the latest right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Hurricane Helene has claimed more than 200 lives across the southeast. 72 of those are located in Buncombe County, where officials said that yesterday there are still more than 200 people missing. The power outage situation does continue to improve. As of this morning, 207,000 customers in the state remain in the dark. However, Duke Energy says that they're on track to restore a lot more customers very quickly. They said by the end of the day today, 27,000 more customers will be restored, and by the end of Sunday, which is October the 6th, they expect another 69,000 customers to have their power restored. They did note that in areas where catastrophic damage does exist, these are going to be the more remote areas of North Carolina's mountains, homes can't receive power and total grid infrastructure damage consists. They note that there's about 105 customers that are without power in those sorts of areas. Duke says that they are working closely with the state on plans to address these individuals in this situation as quickly as possible. It's now 5:07. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. As we continue to discuss devastation out in western North Carolina, one of the stories that has not gotten a lot of play is the major quartz mining operation that takes place out in the western half of our state. Jeff Moore with the Carolina Journal joins us this morning. Jeff, this is a major story that could have an international impact. What are the details?
Yeah, so this is overlooked as we're dealing with a lot of human devastation, understandably, and we want to prioritize all of that. But in one of the corners of the affected area in western North Carolina is a little town called Spruce Pine, and they have deposits there of this ultra fine, super high quality quartz, and that quartz is mined to create crucibles that they then use to manufacture the silicon wafers that power everything from the solar panels and cell phones and computers, and especially the AI data centers now that are so popular. But this mine is the only place in the world, essentially, that this quality of purity quartz actually comes from. And that operation was affected by the floods and is currently shut down. So you've got the tech industry kind of on edge about when this facility may be able to get back up and running to where they can have a supply of this material that is so critical to the industry.
During COVID, we saw with a lot of new cars specifically, there was a huge chip shortage that caused a big backlog in new automobiles. Obviously, now we've got the port strike going on, so there's some issues there as well. Just talk about the importance of this mine and some of the impacts that it could have if this doesn't get back up and operational in a seemingly fast amount of time.
Yeah, you've got a huge confluence of events going on here. Obviously, the port strike, you've got the hurricane relief efforts, and you've got everything else going on that has been reverberating throughout the economy over the last few years as far as supply chains going on. So this comes to a head here. So This mining operation is owned by one company. There are two companies in the area. One's called Sibelco. It's a Belgian company that owns these mines. They are relatively secretive about the mining process. Reportedly, when they have people to come in and work on some of the machinery at the refining facility and things of that nature, they blindfold them while they take them to the machinery and then take the blindfold off so they can work on it. So there's not a whole lot of information coming out of these companies in regular times, but after these storms have hit and internet access and power and everything is cut off, they still haven't even accounted for all of their employees at some of these facilities. The information becomes even harder to come by. So we know that the rail line and the road to the facilities was damaged somewhat. All of this material comes out. And there's a short rail spur and it gets to the refining facilities, but then it goes out on rail lines to be shipped out and distributed to other areas, to where companies like General Electric actually use the materials to make those crucibles to refine the silicon wafers. So you've got the one company that has a larger operation. You have another company called the Quartz Corporation, a very imaginative name there, that is also running a mine in the same area, doing the same thing. But these are the only two operations that account for virtually all of this high quality quartz. There are other areas where they can get quartz like that. There are synthetic processes that they are developing to create quartz crucibles that can kind of fill that gap. But this is the largest and most pure source of this particular mineral deposit in the world. So being able to get access to that and get it back up and running is a really huge deal. From what I've understood, there are some buffer inventories at the companies that use these things to create the crucibles. So there may be a period of weeks or months of supply that's there, so it will allow for time to come back on. But in the meantime, you also probably have competitors that are looking at wedging themselves into this near monopoly that the spruce pine mines have. You have a mine in South Carolina that does some of the same stuff, as well as others across the country and some in different parts of the world like Brazil. But this is the most straightforward thing, a deposit, the highest purity, the easiest to actually treat and refine and get out to where they need it. So there's a lot of emphasis within the industry right now to make sure that they can get that back up and running as quickly as possible.
Safe to assume that if these mines are not back up and operational in a quick timeline, that there would be different processes to go through to maybe get quartz that is close to this same purification level. However, Jeff, I can only imagine that end cost is probably going to be passed on to the consumer if it costs 40, 60, 80% more to get this from start to finish.
Yeah, the reason why the spruce pine quartz is so attractive is because it's already naturally at this very, very ultra high purity level. There are processes that they can put the quartz through to kind of cleanse and clean it to make it more pure. It's a heavy chemical treatments and everything like that, but it adds to the cost, as you mentioned. So there are recourses that they can take to make sure that they have the supply, but that's going to end up stinging consumers in the pocketbook every time they buy a cell phone or use a solar panel, things of that nature. The costs are going to go up if they have a higher input cost there. So as with anything, the inputs, when they can be very simple and pure and straightforward, they're going to prefer that. But it does also highlight a risk we have in this industry and maybe in other ones that we're not even aware of. I was not aware of this mine and the concentration of supply that it had for this industry before this storm hit and took it out. So there may be other things out there across different industries as well that have similar bottlenecks that we may need to look at as when we think about the economy and the kind of security we have to keep things going.
Jeff, you're continuing to track this story. Where do folks find out more details?
Yeah, you can head to carolinajournal.com. We'll be following this story, looking for any releases from the companies to see when these facilities may be back up and running. We wish them the best of luck in locating and accounting for all of their employees, and obviously would encourage everyone to head to carolinajournal.com to check out for the best areas to donate and help the communities that have been affected by this storm.
Jeff Moore joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. 514 News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Time for a look at your Friday morning commute with Boomer Von Cannon.
Thank you, Nick. We're looking great on the
connected.
The Brett Winterble Show.
This afternoon at 3.
News Talk 1110 and 99.3.
WBT.
5:20. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. Also streaming live on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel this morning. Hey, Charlotte, coming up on October the 17th, the Carolina Journal will be releasing their October poll, and there's a poll presentation dinner that's happening in Wingate. Join Carolina Journal's Donna King and John Locke Foundation's Mitch Kokai to discuss the results at their October Civitas poll. You're welcome to join them at 5:30 p.m. for dinner. The poll presentation begins at 6, and there will be time for a question and answer after the fact. That's coming up Thursday, October the 17th, 5:30 to 7 at the Jesse Helms Center in Wingate, North Carolina. You can find out more details by visiting johnlocke.org. That's johnlocke.org. 5:20 now on the Carolina Journal News Hour as we continue to track devastation out in the western half of North Carolina and portions of the southeast U.S. More than 200 people have been confirmed dead as rescue and recovery efforts continue. 72 of those deaths are located in Buncombe County, where officials report more than 200 people are still reportedly missing. As of this morning, 207 customers do remain in the dark. However, Duke Energy says that they expect to have close to 100,000 additional customers get their power restored by the end of Sunday. That's October the 6th. They do note, however, in areas where the most catastrophic damage exists, they are working closely with state and local leaders to try and address how to get access to these areas and begin the process of power restoration. It has been a week since Hurricane Helene impacted the area, dumping some 29 inches of rain in certain parts of the state, leveling cities and towns due to rising water. Mudslides and flooding continued in that area. The recovery efforts do continue this morning. U.S. dock workers yesterday agreed to return to work after port operators and them agreed on a new tentative contract, ending what was a 3-day strike that threatened to disrupt supply chains and the U.S. economy. The breakthrough came Thursday after port employers offered a 62% increase in wages over 6 years. Members of the International Longshoremen's Association were looking for a 70+% raise. That's according to people familiar with the negotiations. This tentative agreement does end a strike that had closed container ports from Maine to Texas and threatened to disrupt the supply chain. 2 ports in North Carolina were affected, Morehead City and Wilmington. The new offer came up after an earlier proposed raise of 50% was shot down by the unions. The White House apparently privately pressing both sides to come back to the negotiating table and figure something out. They said that the agreement would extend the prior contract, which expired at the start of this week. This new contract will run through January the 15th, or the current contract, rather, will run through January the 15th, while the two sides negotiate other issues within the contract. The latest offer would raise the base hourly rate for members of the International Longshoremen's Association to $63 an hour over the next 6 years, again, according to people familiar with those negotiations. So that port strike is now over, and we hopefully won't see any major disruptions to the supply chain as a result. 5:23 on the Carolina Journal News Hour. During the vice presidential debate earlier this week, J.D. Vance mentioned at the end that he was disappointed that there was not a lengthier discussion about energy policy during the CBS-hosted debate that ran for well over 90 minutes. So I thought, well, let's have that conversation. John Sanders joins us this morning. He is the director of Food, Power, and Life over at the John Locke Foundation. John, the senator and VP candidate, says he's disappointed by that. Why was that not a topic, and why did that not come up?
I'm disappointed that it wasn't a topic that came up either. I think the reason it didn't come up is because we have so many other major problems facing the nation, but this is a big one. And I guess the only thing that I can be happy with is it didn't come up, because if energy policy ever becomes at the forefront, we're in a lot of trouble. The fact of the matter is, the United States is a place rich in natural gas and oil, and we also are rich in politicians who seem to think that the best way to produce power now is through intermittent, unreliable sources like solar and wind that are very, very expensive. So we're closing down working power plants, and North Carolina wants to close down all of our coal plants in the next 15 years and replace them. What the governor wants is with solar and wind, and what sensible people would rather see, if we're going to do this, is to replace it with natural gas plants, eventually moving to nuclear, which is also zero emissions. But the problem being is anything that we do, if we're getting rid of working coal plants, working power plants, shutting down nuclear in some places, shutting down natural gas, and trying to move to these intermittent sources, what we're doing is making electricity way more expensive. And electricity is an input price for everything that we produce. It's a major, major expense for homeowners, especially the poor, because we all need it. And so anything that we all need, the costs of those are going to affect the poor even more than everybody else. It's a big deal.
I'm glad you bring all of that up. While you say it's not a top issue on voters' minds, yet it impacts all of us each and every day, whether we're going to the gas station, running our air conditioners or our heat. For business owners, a large cost that they have each and every month is rent and electricity to sell the goods and products and services that they do. It's quite shocking to me, John, that when you look at political polls, energy and energy policy is not higher up there. Makes sense why it's not. This is a pivotal part of every person and business owner's life, and it's just not talked about as much as I think it should be.
I think we're still enjoying fairly reliable service, but once we reach that turning point where suddenly we're dealing with blackouts a lot more, and that's coming, especially in New England and some of these other states that have regional transmission organizations. North Carolina is not part of one, although there's a push to try to get us involved in one. We're going to see a greater uprising for more energy freedom. But right now, I think we're okay.
There was a little bit of a discussion about energy. The question was set up, of course, about climate change, and that's what sparked some of the discussion. You mentioned solar earlier. It was mentioned during the debate earlier this week. And while that's a big push by the left, the Green New Deal, and so many other politicians on the left side of the political aisle, can you give us just a broad overview of why solar is not the step, potentially right now, maybe in the future, but not right now?
Expense and intermittency. That's basically it. You cannot rely on solar to produce. And Governor Cooper knows this. He had solar power produced. He had a solar facility, placed on his property in Nash County, and the producers had said that the maximum energy that they could expect at any moment in time was 0 megawatts, zero watts. The maximum you could expect was nothing, because it's just too intermittent. You can't say when the sun's going to pass behind a cloud during the day. You definitely aren't going to get anything once the sun goes down to a certain level, and nothing at night. So,
As we discussed that, wind is also part of this as well. Some of the same issues, we know that's been a big discussion in southeastern North Carolina, especially off the coasts of New Hanover and Brunswick County. Some of the same issues with wind that you're talking about with solar?
Yes, same issues with wind. You never know when the wind's not going to blow. Yes, we get more wind out at sea and close to the ocean. We also get wind in the mountains, but you also have moments, as you've seen in the UK and in Europe, where for some reason, and they don't know why, the wind just kind of disappears. And so what the left want to do is build in a lot of redundancy in these systems. So if we can't have solar that we can rely upon, if we build a whole lot, we overbuild and then back it up with overbuilding a lot of wind, then maybe we can approximate reliability, which we could get with one single nuclear facility or one single natural gas facility, or we have these coal plants that are working right now.
We'll continue the conversation with John Sanders after this. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. 529 News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Time for a look at your Friday early morning traffic with Boomer Von Cannon.
All right, Nick, thank you, sir.
Tree Care, expert tree care specialist for WBT and for you.
It's 5:36. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good Friday morning to you. Hurricane Helene has claimed more than 200 lives across portions of the southeast half of the United States. The highest death total in North Carolina continues in Buncombe County, where officials updated the public yesterday. 72 deaths in Buncombe County and reports of over 200 people still missing. However, the power outage situation does continue to improve in the western half of the state. 207 customers remain in the dark as of this morning. Duke Energy says that by Sunday, they expect to have an additional 100,000 customers about online. In areas, however, where catastrophic damage does exist, they do note that they're working with state and local leaders to try and figure out how to get access to these areas to begin the process of mass power restoration. We'll continue to track those power outages right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. A quartz mine in Spruce Pine, North Carolina, which was severely damaged and shut down due to severe flooding from Hurricane Helene, is critical to the global semiconductor industry. The mine, which is owned by a company known as Seblico, supplies nearly all of the world's high-purity quartz, which is essential for manufacturing silicone wafers that are used in electronics, everything from your coffee maker to your car. The shutdown has raised concerns about potential disruptions to the chip industry. Though companies may have a few months of inventory as a buffer, recovery efforts are ongoing as the region deals with significant infrastructure damage in that area. There's also some rail lines that they use to get product and supply in and out. That situation is still being assessed by Seblico, and we'll continue to track it here. You can read more by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com. Well, we tracked all week a shutdown at ports from Maine to Texas, 2 in North Carolina, Morehead City and Wilmington. The strike was ongoing until yesterday afternoon when U.S. dock workers, part of the International Longshoremen's Association, some 45,000 workers, announced that they would return to work. This is after port operators made additional headway in contract negotiations. The breakthrough Thursday came after port employees offered a 62% increase in wages over 6 years. That's according to multiple sources that know and are tracking that negotiation. The agreement ends a strike that had closed container ports up and down the U.S. East Coast and into parts of the Gulf and threatened to disrupt everything from the supply of bananas in the supermarkets to the flow of cars through American factories. The new offer is up from earlier proposed rates of 50%. That came after the White House privately pressed large shipping lines and cargo terminal operators to make a new offer to the union. The International Longshoremen's Association and port operators, in a joint statement, said that they reached a tentative agreement on wages and union members would officially return to work. They said the agreement would extend the current contract, which expired at the start of this week, through January the 15th. Noting after the presidential election while the two sides negotiate on other issues. That includes wages and automation on ports and docks across the U.S. The latest offer would raise the base hourly rate for port workers from $39 an hour to $63 an hour over a 6-year period of time. One of the individuals who are close to the negotiation said the offer is being made on the condition that the dock workers go back to work and agree to efficiency gains. It is now 5:40 on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Continuing our energy discussion this morning, John Sanders is the director of the Center for Food, Power, and Life over at the John Locke Foundation. John, we talked a little bit about some of the discussion in the vice presidential debate earlier this week. It seems like a lot of what we're discussing revolves around this fascination in this discussion around climate change. No more oil, no more gas, no more coal. That's pushed some of these new energy forms like wind, solar that we were talking about to the forefront. However, nuclear is very rarely discussed in all of this, and from everything I've read, it seems like that might be the kind of golden bullet here to maybe solve both of the problems and make both sides happy.
I've always wondered about that. If the goal really is to replace these other sources, then we need to replace it with something that's going to be as capable, at least as capable, of producing power as baseload coal and natural gas. And nuclear is the only one that can do that. That is also zero emissions. And nuclear is completely zero emissions, unlike solar and wind, because they need to be backed up with something when they're not working, and that usually ends up being combustion turbine natural gas, which is much more carbon emissive than solar and wind.
Well, and then you also add on top of it, to produce these solar panels, to produce these major wind turbines, let's not pretend and act like that doesn't also take an incredible amount of resources to produce those, John. That often gets left out of the conversation as well.
Yeah, the conversation with environmentalism always and only ends with the emissions of the facility itself and not the backups. It never looks at how much land those things require. They require enormous swaths of land compared with to produce the same amount of land of power, that nuclear could do. Nuclear could do it in a mile, a square mile. Natural gas could do it in a square mile. It would take many miles for solar and wind especially to produce. And then of course the materials, the landfill of these worn out materials, they wear out in 25 years. Nuclear can go at least 80. It's just a matter of maintenance.
John Sanders joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. As we look at nuclear, that is a big discussion, and a lot of that work is actually being done in portions of southeastern North Carolina. Can you talk briefly about small modular reactors? That seems to be the buzzword around the nuclear industry right now.
Well, the idea of small modular reactors is we can place these quickly. It takes a long time to get a brand new full-scale nuclear reactor going. Part of that is a regulatory problem. The regulatory environment set up for nuclear is kind of basically to try to prevent them from being built. And I do think there are some changes being made there. But with the small modular facilities, they're not near as big. You can site them on an old coal facility. You can build those within a few years on an old coal facility, and you've already got the transmission set up. So they're very promising.
As we continue that conversation on that vein this morning, when you look at what folks demand with power, John, I think it's safe to say that when most folks walk into their house and flick the light switch on, they want there to be power immediately available. Why is it that there's such a hard thing for folks to understand that with some of these unreliable sources that you described, just based on the nature of what they are, folks just don't really seem to grasp that? That to me is a big discussion.
I think because we still, for the most part, are enjoying reliable power. Our utility has done very well. We've become more efficient in our use of power, so we haven't had to need to build as many new facilities. So even though we are importing a lot more people into North Carolina, we are using our energy more efficiently, so we're not noticing. But in the next few years, we're building these major data sites. We've got AI, we've got if the governor gets his way, which I don't think is entirely possible because they're not that popular, I think we've reached the limit for electric vehicles. We'd have to continue to double the demand for electric vehicles every 2 years or so in order to reach the governor's limit. But if we get there, we're going to have a whole lot of people who have electric vehicles who've got to plug them in sometime, and most of them are going to come home and plug them in when it's dark outside and solar can't produce. So what are we going to do? How are we going to power these things up? I was actually behind an EV this week, and I don't know whose it was, but it said coal powered. And I was thinking about that, and I thought, this guy is actually right. It is coal powered. He's plugging it in, and the electricity is being generated by coal.
John Sanders with the John Locke Foundation joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. 5:45 now, 5:50, 5:46 now on the Carolina Journal News Hour. There are some issues out on the roadway this morning. Let's get an update with Boomer Von Cannon.
Yes, sir, Nick. You got it, my man. They're looking.
this afternoon at 3.
News Talk 1110 and 99.3.
WBT.
5:51. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. I'm Nick Craig. You're listening to News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. Taking a look at some of our top stories this morning. A strike that was taking place at U.S. ports from Maine to Texas has ended. The 3-day strike was threatening to disrupt the American economy and severely hamper the supply chain. The breakthrough Thursday came after port employers offered a 62% increase in wages over 6 years to some 45,000 individuals that are part of the International Longshoremen's Association. The agreement ends a strike that had closed container ports from Maine to Texas and threatened to disrupt everything from the supply of bananas in the supermarket to the flow of cars through American factories. The new offer, which is up from previous that had stalled these contract negotiations, came after the White House privately and publicly pressed the large shipping lines and cargo terminal operators to make a new offer to the union. The agreement would extend the current contract that's in place, which expired at the start of this week, through January the 15th of next year. That would take place while the two sides negotiate other issues in the contract, one of the big ones being automation on docks. The latest offer would raise the base hourly rate for port workers from $39 an hour to $63 an hour over the next 6 years. One of the individuals that are familiar with these internal negotiations said that this is all being made on the condition that dock workers go back to work and agree to efficiency gains from the port operators. So this is still a story that we are tracking, and we'll continue to follow it right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. A quartz mine in Spruce Pines, North Carolina, which is critical to the global semiconductor industry, has been temporarily shut down due to severe flooding and damage caused by Hurricane Helene 1 week ago. The mine, which is owned by Seblico, supplies nearly all of the world's high-purity quartz, which is essential for manufacturing silicone wafers used in electronics, everything from your cell phone to your car. The shutdown has raised concerns about potential disruptions to the chip industry. However, companies may have a few months of inventory as a buffer. Recovery efforts are still ongoing in that region as they deal with significant infrastructure damage, not only power and water, but rail service to and from this quartz mine. This is going to be a very interesting story to track, and you can read more details and keep up to date with the latest over at CarolinaJournal.com. Turning our attention to Hurricane Helene this morning, the death toll is now 200 across the southeast. 72 deaths are located in Buncombe County, where officials are reporting more than 200 people still missing. And the power outage situation does continue to improve. Duke Energy notes that they expect to have another 100,000 customers online in North Carolina by the end of Sunday. With all of that, the Biden administration is reporting that FEMA is going to run out of money after Hurricane Helene. In comments to the media earlier this week, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said that FEMA will need more money to get through the hurricane season, which runs through November the 30th. His comments come as residents of western North Carolina continue to be airlifted out of harm's way and struggle with no water, no power, and in some cases, no food for days. Mayorkas said, quote, "We are meeting the immediate needs with the money that we have. We are expecting another hurricane hitting, and we don't have the funds. FEMA does not have the funds to make it through the hurricane season." This is very different from comments he made less than 3 months ago to the Associated Press. Here's Mayorkas.
FEMA is tremendously prepared. This is what we do. This is what they do. And the key here, Rebecca, is also to make sure that the communities who are potentially impacted are prepared as well.
tremendously prepared 3 months ago. Now they have no money. How that works, your guess is as good as mine. In comments with Mayorkas and Governor Roy Cooper during a Raleigh visit on Wednesday, President Joe Biden told the media that he promised that the federal government would cover the federal costs, 100% of the cost of debris cleanup and emergency protective measures for 6 months following Hurricane Helene. Also on Wednesday, Vice President Kamala Harris announced from her tour of Florida that Americans impacted by Helene will get a one-time $750 per person allocation from FEMA. That number widely ridiculed as critics point to nearly $1 billion that the Biden and Harris administration have spent through FEMA for their Shelter and Services Program. SSP. That program has been used on housing and providing other services for illegal immigrants in the United States. Florida Attorney General Ashley Moody said yesterday they have taken the FEMA Emergency Food and Shelter Program and over time siphoned off hundreds of millions of dollars into basically making it an illegal immigrant resettlement program. The SSP program issues grants and provides financial support to non-federal entities to provide humanitarian services to non-citizen migrants following their release from the Department of Homeland Security. More than $1 billion in the last 2 years have been allocated. The Florida AG continued by saying right now in Florida, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia, all of these states are hurting because of this truly natural disaster. They're saying we need more money. And of course, they need more money because they've been laundering it from the intended purpose of this fund that Congress set forth. There's a lot that we are, of course, still tracking with Hurricane Helene. Crews continuing their restoration efforts. Search and rescue operations do continue. We'll follow that over the weekend and have the latest details coming up for you Monday morning. That's going to do it for the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. Have a great weekend. We're back Monday morning at 5.